Intro, and then we'll launch right into the questions. Gee, I think we're live now. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Jinnah Institute's webinar on yesterday's development in New Delhi, which Indo-Pak watchers are monitoring with keen interest. PM Modi met with leaders from Jammu and Kashmir, many of whom are part of the Gupkar Alliance, or conglomeration of political parties that oppose the revocation of Article 370 and 35A in J&K. PM Modi expressed in this meeting that statehood will be restored at an appropriate time, but the exercise of delimitation has to come first. Delimitation is, of course, a periodic exercise that readjusts the representation of lawmakers in state assemblies based on demographic change. And this exercise may possibly rejig the representation of Hindu-majority Jammu against the more populous and Muslim-majority Kashmir. Delimitation was on a freeze till 2026, so why the hurry is one question. But away from all these technicalities, the sharp symbolism of a meeting with Kashmiri leaders for the first time after August 5th is not lost upon us. Many of these leaders were incarcerated and have been summoned in a grand democratic gesture by Mr. Modi and Amit Shah. So is this the great climb down from the BJP's hostile perch against Kashmiri leaders? Or is it paving the way towards further disenfranchisement of Kashmiris, packaged, of course, as a gesture of reconciliation and delivered in the idiom of democratic rights? I'm very happy to pose these questions to Khurram Dastagir Saab, former federal minister, Ms. Naseem Zehra, author and veteran journalist, and Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, former foreign secretary. I welcome all of you. And straight up, could we start with the question to you, Naseem? Do you see this as a climb down by the BJP, as a retreat on its earlier conceit that the Kashmiri leadership need not be consulted and even jailed for good measure, as some have stated? And what is your reading of the optics of this meeting that happened yesterday?
Thank you, Salman, and thank you, Jinnah Institute. Important subject that you've picked up, and within hours of the meeting having ended. I think that in terms of the optics, more than the leaders meeting Modi, the message that has gone out, and the one that has seemed to have been the dominant message from Delhi, crafted very ingenuously, that statehood can be restored, number one. Number two, elections, grassroots level representation. So these are the two messages that Delhi sent out, and unless there's a counter narrative to it, this can ease the pressure that Delhi has faced over the past couple of years, less so in the last 4 to 6 months. That has to do with Pakistan's policy. We can discuss that, but as of now, I think it's a move that has been made by the Modi government, and it's very much in line with the plan that they launched August 5th, 2019, which was really to begin the decimation in an irrevocable manner of the Kashmiri struggle for self-determination. They are moving according to a plan, and they have moved very, very carefully, very consistently, and in a very definitive manner. And if we look at what has happened since 2019 up till now, this fits in very well with the colonial settler plan of New Delhi. And hence, I think that as far as Delhi is concerned, it's a move that they've made. It's a smart move in the short run. And to counter it, what are the elements out there? In terms of Abdullah, the National Conference agreeing to participate in the delimitation exercise, that's a critical, interesting development. And let me recall here for the viewers that reportedly when 2019 step was taken, August 5th, Abdullah Saab met one of the journalists, Kashmiri journalists, and he said the Indians have chewed on more than they can, taken on more than they can chew, and that Pakistan will go into every capital and really run down this Indian exercise and this Indian step, and they will never be able to get away with it. So let me just end here by saying the big question will be how Pakistan is going to counter this. And just before I end, remember the fact that when Prime Minister Imran Khan went on the offensive with the Indian fascist kind of story, it did sell, it did have, there was resonance, there was pressure on Delhi. What has happened to Pakistan in the last 6-8 months? That's the big question.
Thank you for that, Naseem. I'm going to ask a similar question, building upon what Naseem said to Jalil Abbas Jilani Sahab. Sir, again, what is your impression of this meeting and also this whole business of delimitation? There have been fears of demographic change for long, and maneuvers through legalese and legislation that seem to be working for the BJP so far, as Naseem says. What is your impression of the appropriate time when PM Modi may finally allow statehood to return to Kashmir? So your mic is on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. Thank you. Ji, please go ahead. I think Jalil Saab is having some technical difficulty. Khurram Dastagir Saab, if I can pose that question to you. What is your impression of the meeting that has happened yesterday, and what do you think may come of it for Kashmiris, and does it align with the BJP's long-standing policy, as Naseem has mentioned? Sir.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thanks to Jinnah Institute for inviting me to this webinar. Modi is getting away with it. That's my impression. It's the yesterday's meeting was essentially a normalization trap to the already pro-India parties. Because let's remember, only pro-India parties were invited. This People's Alliance for Gopkar Declaration, these are already parties that have been part of Kashmir's government for some decades, and they accept the Indian hegemony and constitution. And now that Modi first plunged, let's say, a 10-inch knife into the back of Kashmiris, now he has retreated that 10-inch knife 2 inches and say, okay, now things are fine. Let's have assembly delimitation, assembly elections. But what has happened? What has really happened is that Kashmir's the occupied Kashmir's special status is gone forever. So restoration of statehood, even if that happens, which I think is extremely unlikely, is the fact is that the issue of domicile, the issue of land ownership, that's gone, because Modi has given no indication whatsoever that even if statehood is restored, the special status will also be restored. So even if so that it's long time in the future, the state thing, but at the moment is essentially what Modi is offering to the PAGD is elections under a severely curtailed legislature, and the government that's going to result out of that election is also going to be practically a puppet because it's going to be a union territory. If there is any seriousness in Modi regarding Pakistan, the best that I can expect from him is statehood might be restored before the elections, which I still think is extremely unlikely, because Modi so far has given no indication whatsoever of any rollback of August 2019 actions. That's where we stand. And the fact that, I'm grateful that Mr. Farooq Abdullah was quoted, or Umar Abdullah was quoted, that, Pakistan will go to every capital and raise holy hell. Pakistan has not raised holy hell, sadly. In fact, the world capitals and in fact the world media has been much more active in highlighting the Kashmir issue, the fact that there have been communication blockades, there has been lockdown of Kashmir, thousands have been detained. Pakistan has done very little. And now, essentially, the same kind of normalization exercise that Modi is now conducting has been occurring here in Pakistan, whether overtly or covertly, because despite Prime Minister's very clear stance that no talks with India will take place until India agrees to some rollback of August 19 actions, talks have been taking place. There is an LOC ceasefire. And the fact that whatever the Prime Minister says, he has in the end weakened it, and the diplomatic onslaught that we were expecting against India has not occurred. So Modi is essentially offering to already pro-India parties that I'll give you certain scraps of power and let's see how it goes. And what he's going to take out of it, I think one real benefit should be clear to the participants, is that he's going to now, the government is going to go to Supreme Court where this is pending and tell the Indian Supreme Court that we have begun negotiations, so you can delay hearing this case for a while until we have completed our negotiations. So Modi benefits out of the court challenge of his August 19 actions. He has already benefited from Pakistan's diplomatic lassitude on this issue, and there he's essentially offering a normalization exercise to the Kashmiri people at the moment under a union territory severely curtailed legislative authority.
Thank you, sir, for that very authoritative comment, as well as Pakistan's position. I'd like to refer that to Jalil Abbas Saab. Sir, Pakistan was meant to do a couple of things. It did not. The Indian commentariat is also saying that Pakistan should consider this an internal Indian matter. I think it's important to articulate Pakistan's interest afresh, to stake our claim, as well as remind people in India that Pakistan is still a party to this conflict. What is Pakistan's interest in seeing? What is Pakistan's version of a normalized situation in Kashmir?
Well, Salman, I would also like to thank you, like my other colleagues, for organizing this timely discussion. In the first place, I would say that this meeting should not excite us beyond a certain extent, for the simple reason that this Gupkar gang, which had met the Prime Minister of India, this is the kind of a script that we had seen in the past several decades. There were many such initiatives which had been taken by the Indian government, but those initiatives all failed because of the absence of the real representatives of the people of Kashmir. If you recall, the Indian government had taken similar actions in the 80s, in the 90s, and then this time, before calling the meeting of this Gupkar gang, the Indian government had also toyed with the idea of establishing a king's party known as Apni Party for Jammu and Kashmir, but that also failed miserably. These leaders, they are absolutely discredited as far as the Kashmiris are concerned. You must have seen that these are the known faces who call themselves Indians, and they, if you have heard the interviews of most of these leaders, they also referred to their meeting with the Indian Prime Minister as our constitution, our Prime Minister, so there is no harm in us meeting with the. So this stance is completely at variance with the people of Indian occupied Kashmir. Now, with regard to your question as to what kind of mechanism Pakistan would like to have, Pakistan is very, very clear. Pakistan, for us, it is extremely important that the action that India had taken on 5th August 2019, that should be reversed. Unless that action is reversed, Pakistan certainly would not be in a position to have a dialogue or any kind of dialogue with India. Khurram Dastagir Sahab mentioned about the dialogue, but that dialogue is something which is a kind of a back channel dialogue, which I personally feel is also important in order to avoid so many misunderstandings that can develop in this kind of a situation. I would also term the ceasefire on the line of control as a positive development, but that positive development will only become the harbinger of a peace process in case the line of control ceasefire is formalized in some kind of an agreement, in some kind of a verifiable agreement between the two countries. Then I think probably it is also important for India to reverse the process. Prime Minister Modi has absolutely made no commitment that this decision would be reversed, but then many of the Indians, they feel that this declaration at some stage of statehood, the revival of statehood for Indian occupied Kashmir, should be seen as a partial reversal of that action. But I'm sure that a majority of the Kashmiris would not accept that, because that partial reversal of the statehood would only include Jammu and Kashmir, and it would not include Ladakh, which was the original arrangement prior to 5th August 2019 Indian action. And I think once that reversal takes place, then so many things can happen. Dialogue can then resume. The confidence-building measures that Pakistan and India had agreed way back in 2005, 2006, they could, such as the Srinagar-Muzaffarabad bus service, Poonch-Rawalakot bus service without passports and visas. That is something that could be revived between our two countries. And also, some of the past agreements which had almost taken shape, they could be revived. Discussions on those agreements could be revived, and perhaps we could sort of move forward. I am personally of the view that Pakistan-India issues are not insurmountable, in the sense that we can certainly resolve our issues between our two countries, but then there is a proviso, and the proviso is in the shape of a bold and courageous leadership on both sides. I don't see Modi behaving in the fashion that Prime Minister Modi had behaved way back in 2003, when he declared in Indian occupied Kashmir that we would like to resolve the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in accordance with Insaniyat and Jamhuriyat, and not necessarily in accordance with the Indian Constitution. So I think that is the kind of spirit that is needed at the leadership level. Secondly, and the most important, is that such initiatives at the leadership level should also be backed and supported by the opposition parties, because when it comes to Pakistan-India relations, it is extremely important that the opposition parties, they should also extend their support to any peace process. We have to see if those kind of conditions, they exist in India. I don't think that situation is right. Modi certainly has been weakened to a large extent. His reputation has gone down significantly since the time he had taken over as India's Prime Minister in 2014. He is facing a lot of crisis. He lost the state elections in West Bengal miserably. And there are so many external factors also. Externally also, his reputation is not the same as was the case previously. Most of the countries which had endorsed India's position, they feel embarrassed in endorsing India's position, not only on Kashmir, but also on so many other issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Naseem, this development is happening in against the backdrop of February and March, where we acknowledged the existence of a back channel. We got into a conversation, an accelerated exchange of what may be possible over the short-term future. There was a great deal of excitement among certain groups on resuming dialogue and other things. Now, last week, India and Pakistan returned to saying nasty things about each other at the UNSC, etc. Do you think the resumption of dialogue is in the offing? Do you think a positive future for Indo-Pak relations is there? And what is Pakistan's Kashmir ask? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay. So whether India or Pakistan future looks positive, I think that's, frankly speaking, that's about a process situation. There's no yes or no to that. Efforts will be made, and we'll have to see how it kind of things develop. But let me go back to what Ambassador Jalil Abbas was saying a moment ago. I think that the question is not whether anybody in Pakistan is getting excited, quote unquote, about this. The question is very simple and straightforward. The question is that the future of the Kashmir struggle, which is 3 centuries old, mind you, since the time that the Treaty of Amritsar was signed and Jammu Kashmir was given away to the Maharaja. This movement is as old as that. We have seen over the we are into the 3rd century, and every ruler tried to crush the Kashmiris, and they managed to still come out at the top in terms of struggling, not surrender. Now, where we stand since post 2019, the situation is very simple. The point is that India, we can talk, we can say the world doesn't like India. We can say, nobody buys into the Indian narrative. We can say the Kashmiris don't like it. But we must look at the clear and present danger that faces the Kashmiri movement, which is, number one, that 2019 situation has not been reversed. Number two, that there has been demographic changes, whether it is the J&K Kashmiri administration, which is now largely non-Kashmiri, whether it is giving out domiciles to non-Kashmiris. And now, I think we're underestimating, Salman, what is happening as we speak. The delimitation exercise, which is frozen for India until 2026. Modi called these people to say, we have to go ahead with this exercise because this must preface the elections, the state elections, whatever, the constituency elections. And delimitation means, I'm sure people have looked at that in detail. Delimitation means that the overwhelming, it's going to be the non-Muslims who will hold the majority then in the J&K state. And the plan, as we read it now, and as it is, clearly articulated, stated, that the number of constituencies will increase in Jammu, and there will be non-Muslims overall in the state who will have the majority. And the projection really is that this is going to happen, and then you will have a BJP majority, and even if some form of statehood is revoked, the J&K assembly will obviously go according to what the Modi Amit Shah plan is. And remember that once you have majority of a particular kind, as we saw in the Lok Sabha, I mean, the 2019 action is from the Indian Constitution's point of view. I mean, they've seen it as a constitutional action, as a legal action. It is being questioned in the Supreme Court, but it's not going to be brought up into the Supreme Court. And 370's resurrection is not going to be debated until and unless you have this delimitation exercise take place. So I think the question for Pakistan is really not, how is Pakistan going to deal with the LOC? How is Pakistan going to look at trade? How is Pakistan going to go back to the bus service? The question is India on track? Its project of settler colonialism in a way that it tries to make it irreversible. Mind you, when we talk about the Kashmiri people right now, APHC, as you know, with Gilani Saab down and out, God give him some miraculous recovery. He has Alzheimer's. He's lying in bed. He's the icon of the movement. He is, for all practical purposes, not in a position to do much. You know that Yasin Malik is behind bars. And so the question really for Pakistan, I think everything else for now is irrelevant. The question is that Prime Minister Imran Khan's basic thrust of pushing the Indian, framing the Indians as fascist, using the facts of the situation post 2019, to the extent that the British reached out to a senior Pakistani, authority here to say that please tell him to stop using fascism, etc., because that's not going to help. And because we had started back channel December 2020, not started then, we started it 2-3 years ago, but 2020 December is when the Indians proposed dialogue. So we went easy. You've got to, I think the question is, what is our policy? Is Pakistan doing enough politically, internationally, to basically, come up with a very proactive counter story to what the Indians are doing right now? After all, Pakistan has to take up this issue, even at the level of the UNGA, at ICJ level. We haven't used those platforms. Why did then the UNGA president, when he came to Pakistan, in everybody's view, he said loud and clear that this issue needs to this is that we can raise the entire gambit of Pakistan-India relations. That's not the important question now. The question right now is Pakistan, that's the question we must ask, is Pakistan doing enough of what it can do to push back the Indian post-19 steps that India is taking to kind of facilitate the Kashmiri struggle? And I think the answer is no.
Khurram Saab, a strong opinion from Naseem there. You also said that Modi is getting away with murder, and perhaps then we are making the ultimate concession in this regard. Could you respond to that? If Pakistan, were to take up action, what would it be? We've thought about this, we've discussed this internally several times over, but in 2021, what is Pakistan willing to do and prepared to do?
First of all, let's put the fundamental crime at the center of our discussion. The fundamental crime is the Indian illegal occupation of Kashmir. That's what it is. Now, and another second fundamental fact is that even before August 2019, the situation was no nirvana. The situation was as bad as could be. But what happened on August 5, 2019 was that BJP, which had in fact put this item on its election manifesto, started covering that crime under the ostensible layer of Indian constitution. So they are putting, we consider it illegal, or we might consider it unjustifiable, but they are now putting these layers of electoral law, state law, constitutional changes over that fundamental crime, trying to hide from the world that the illegal occupation had taken place. It is an internationally recognized dispute, but of course India is putting all these layers. And sadly again, because we have been, particularly after August 2019, Pakistan's diplomacy has practically been comatose. We have been in a coma regarding India. And all this fear that Pakistan will raise hell across the world has not been realized. So here we are, that we are in a situation in which we, because of our own internal issues, very vulnerable on the economic front, on FATF and IMF issues, in which international powers can pressurize us and have been pressurizing us. And the fact that we see no way out because we are unable to do the kind of diplomacy that was required. So what Pakistan has done essentially is to say, okay, we accept the inevitable and swallow the unpalatable. And essentially, that's why I say that what Modi has begun on the Indian side, this normalization under the guise of delimitation and assembly elections, Pakistan began some 8 months ago and said, okay, we start talking to India, LOC ceasefire, fine. But does that really help the Kashmiri people? Is this better dialogue situation with Pakistan and India, does it in any way even lead to Indian being exposed for the crime that they did, even before 2019? We had an opportunity. I mean, I like to remind many people that the strange thing happened in 2020, that two photographers American photographers won the Pulitzer Prize for photography for their expose of India's crimes in Kashmir. We had a tremendous opportunity to take this to the world, but instead we are back to this normalization, which is not a normalization. First of all, we have this very interesting situation in which Prime Minister Imran Khan goes to Kotli in Azad Kashmir and offers independence to Kashmiris once the plebiscite has taken place. Okay, confuses the issue. Then the Chief of Army Staff at the Islamabad Security Dialogue says, let's forget history, let's extend hand of peace, and geoeconomics is important. And then a few days later, we hear this, that trade is being normalized or trade is being restored, then trade is not being restored. And then, Prime Minister once again comes out and says, we are not going to talk to India until it rolls back 2019. But then again, weakens his statement by saying, okay, we will, even a plan of action of rollback, a timeline will suffice for us to talk. The thing is, Pakistan's diplomacy, because of the confusion at the top, has been lacking. And the sad fact is that this covert dialogue, whether we like it or don't like it, was not announced in a meeting in Parliament or as a government policy. It was announced by our army chief in a closed meeting of 30 media anchors. That's how Pakistan's policy is being announced to the world and to the country. So it's actually the challenge even before 2019 was immense. After 2019, it is even more immense because India is just essentially pushing its claws deeper and deeper into Kashmir. And the fact that they have now split it into three parts, how is that going to work out? We don't know. Our challenge remains the same, to expose India's crime and demand from the international community that this illegal occupation has to end in a democratic manner, in a peaceful manner, and Pakistan will go out. But the essential responsibility of Pakistan to take this to the world using all the tools that we now have of public and traditional diplomacy, that is where Pakistan has been lacking.
Jalil Sahab, there are different centers of power, as there are different opinions on this as well. But you mentioned that revisiting older formulas may be possible. Now, older formulas perhaps may not enjoy the support of Pakistan's political parties or opinion leaders. What formula do you think, in your mind, may work when policy is sometimes covertized, when we do not have platforms where consensus can be built? And therefore, I think such conversations are important because they reflect the truth of where we stand on such subjects. How is policy going to be turned into consensus?
We should have no doubt that a resolution of the Kashmir dispute is only possible if it is acceptable to all the three parties, India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiris. Why we refer to the 4-point formula as a possible mechanism to resolve this issue? It certainly provided, it had taken into account the aspirations of the Kashmiris. Almost all the political parties who may now be opposing the same formula, if I recall correctly, everybody was on board when those negotiations were taking place. Because, as I mentioned earlier, for any mechanism to succeed, endorsement by all the political parties is also very, very important, besides media endorsement, besides the support of the international community, and also support of the core constituencies. The formula that we are talking about was not a permanent solution. It only talked about an interim solution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. The idea basically was to give relief to the people of Kashmir. What it entailed was maximum autonomy for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, of the kind that they had seen prior to 1953, when Indian occupied Kashmir used to have a Sadr-e Riyasat. They had their separate flag, they had their own. So that's the kind of an arrangement that was being worked out. Secondly, it also called for the withdrawal of troops from the respective sides of Kashmir. Now, Indian occupied Kashmir has more than 700,000 troops stationed there, and they are responsible for all the sufferings that Kashmiris they have for the last many decades. So, idea was to make Kashmir peaceful after the withdrawal of the Indian troops. Thirdly, the proposal entailed the line of control to be made irrelevant only for the Kashmiris, so that Kashmiris are able to meet each other frequently. They can visit each other, they can visit friends, they can visit their relations. There are intermarriages between the Kashmiris from both sides of the line of control. So this was the kind of an arrangement, and this arrangement would be subject to a review after about 15 to 20 years. So that's the kind of an arrangement. I don't see anything wrong with that kind of an arrangement. But the point is that now the situation is entirely different. We can't go back to the same situation because of the kind of position that Prime Minister Modi has taken. He has been extremely aggressive towards Pakistan ever since he has taken power in India. He is kind of become a slave of his own ideology when it comes to Pakistan and also the Muslims of South Asia. So we should not really expect any miracle at this stage. But as I mentioned, that I am not as pessimistic as is the general view with regard to this relationship or with regard to the situation in Kashmir, because if we go back to the history, I remember I was a student at that time when Simla Agreement was signed. We had lost East Pakistan. Simla Agreement had been signed, and people were absolutely, there was some kind of a depression which had set in Pakistan as well as but the Kashmir, India could not really grab Kashmir the way it wanted to for the last 40, 50 years. The situation is not dissimilar from the situation that we have seen in the past. That is why I said that for as long as the Kashmiris, they do not give in. I'm not talking about the Kashmiris who met with the Indian Prime Minister yesterday. They are not Kashmiris. They call themselves Indians, and they behave like Indians. They are committed to the Indian constitution. But majority of the Kashmiris from Indian occupied Kashmir, they are not. And India will have to realize one day that it cannot sort of gobble Kashmir the way it wants to do that. It will have to, otherwise, India and Pakistan will remain in this kind of a hostile environment for another generation to come.
Naseem, I found you shaking your head at some of those observations. Is there a way forward in Pakistan? And then is there a way forward with India?
Well, I mean, I think that it's not, the recalling Simla Agreement, recalling the situation at that point, and drawing any analogy here, or I guess I don't understand all of that. What I know for a fact is that where we stand today, and I think that Ambassador Gilani would do well to address the question of, is Pakistan right now doing as much as it should be doing to push back the Indian moves? I think that, like, this is not 1972. This is a very different situation. And when we talk about the Kashmiris not accepting Indian hegemony, Indian colonialism, Indian oppression, while there's no doubt about that, but see how India is moving forward. and the only bulwark against India's total success is Pakistan. And this comes straight from the horse's mouth, straight from the Kashmiris. And right now, Pakistan has pressed its mute button internationally. Prime Minister Imran Khan is categorical and very clear that we will not talk to the Indians till they don't reverse the situation of 5th August, 4th August 2019. But that's good and fair enough. But we've got to have our eyes on the ground and see what's actually India doing practically, and how. I mean, just saying we won't talk is not sufficient. What is it not a fact that Pakistan's very astute, very successful, very proactive, public diplomacy going on the offensive against India, led by the Prime Minister after 2019 August, it did bear fruit. It put India on the defensive, and then something happened 6-8 months ago. I mean, I think Ambassador Jalil is part of advisory committee that's there on foreign policy. He should tell us. I mean, what after all, if the UNGA president is standing in Pakistan and saying Pakistan should be more active, if we see that our mute button seems to be on in terms beyond rhetorics, in terms of how many capitals has Pakistani diplomats raised this issue proactively, Salman, in the last 6 months? How much have you heard from the government of Pakistan in the last 48 hours since this whole, the talking of constituencies and whatever India is trying to do and what Modi's proposed? It's not good enough to say that these are sold out people who are sitting with Modi, but then it's a sold out assembly that has revoked the status of Kashmir, revoked 370. I think the confusion in Pakistan and the lack of a consensus in Pakistan, while everybody seems to be, obviously there's nobody here who's keen to sell out Kashmir, not at all. But I think that what is called for is a more clinical analysis of the situation, and Pakistan needs to be more proactive. You're talking of Indian commentators. I've been talking to Kashmiris in Srinagar since the morning. I've read so much of what has come out in the last 48 hours. And forget about what the Kashmiris are saying. Can't we see for ourselves that our policy is not proactive, pushing back on any of these things?
Several questions there for Jalil Abbas. Sir, before we just come to you, and you can respond to any number of those questions raised by Naseem. Khurram Dastagir Saab, there is a regional environment also that has a bearing on this. The back channel was, brokered by Middle Eastern monarchies, or so the claim goes. There is also a multilateral environment. Afghanistan is a key question that India and Pakistan will be participants in, whatever their problems. China is also an actor in this mix. Can Kashmir be approached via multilateral means? Is the resolution to this issue outside Islamabad and New Delhi? If you can respond to that and any number of queries that Naseem brought up, and then we'll go to Jalil Abbas. Over to you, sir. You're on mute, sir.
This is precisely the vista that has been opened by Prime Minister's remark, and let me quote him directly. He said, "The moment there is a settlement on Kashmir, we will not need to have this nuclear deterrent." First, I have grave issues with the word settlement. But then he has opened this up to international intervention and international interference. We have had this very grave issue of international concerns about our nuclear program. And now he has put a condition, a very interesting condition, that, okay, if you help us settle the Kashmir issue, we are amenable on the nuclear front. So yes, other powers are going to be very interested. Maybe they would be interested, as we have long tried to leverage Afghanistan to find a solution on Kashmir. We have not been able to leverage it. All through from 2001 to 8 practically, when Pakistan was a major non-NATO ally, we tried to leverage it. We could not leverage it. Uh, so again, it comes down to the strength and vigor of our diplomacy. Yes, it also comes down to Pakistan's internal strength and Pakistan's internal economic vigor that comes into play. But yes, we are opening ourselves up on so many fronts that even this issue of Kashmir being settled somehow uh, raises my hackles. Because unless it is settled according to wishes of the Kashmiri people, as per UN resolution, then what are UN resolutions? UN resolution simply is the right to self determination. And what I see happening is, as a larger trend, both in India and Pakistan, is over the last 8 months, and then in India, the recent developments, is that that's right to self determination is fading from view. We are using words like settlement, peace, geoeconomics, when in fact it's the right to self-determination and the other fact of the crime of Indian illegal occupation that should be center stage. But somehow these are fading from view. We are going towards a settlement, and yes, if China can help us in that regard, see what happened after Balakot attack. There was a very interesting corollary to that. That after Balakot attack, few weeks after it, once the situation a little bit normalized, suddenly China uh, ended its veto on one of the jihadi leaders that Pakistan was always objecting to, and suddenly China, which had been stopping it, reversed its veto, and that person was declared as a sanctioned individual, as a terrorist. So, yes, there is room for international intervention in this issue, but I'm sorry to be the most pessimist person in this group. The fact is that so far Pakistan has not demonstrated any ability to leverage international pressures to move even an inch towards the positive side of finding a way to restore the right of self determination to the Kashmiri people, which, as I see in the last 8 months, is receding even farther from view than it was pre 2019.
Dalil Abbas, would you like to come in and respond to that?
Well, I certainly would agree with Naseem Zahra Sahaba and Khurram Dastagir Sahab that we needed to take some more actions post 5th August 2019. Initially, we did take some actions. For instance, we did extensive lobbying at various world capitals. We did extensive lobbying at the US Congress level, with the European Parliament, with the Nordic countries, and those lobbying efforts resulted in the shape of at least 2 or 3 discussions in the American Congress, by a kind of a discussion in the European Parliament and also in the Nordic countries. But I think we needed to do more. We needed to send out special envoys in order to show the seriousness and the concerns that we have with regard to the Indian action to almost every nook and corner of the world. That we did not. And we did not perhaps do that in view of the COVID situation, because in many countries, the flights became a major issue, although it was something that was considered seriously by the advisory council, and it was suggested. As a matter of fact, the names had also been finalized, but then because of the flight connections or other difficulties due to COVID situation, special envoys could not be sent. But then, with regard to international intervention or seeking international intervention, I don't think that would be a prudent approach. Why I say that? One, because the international community, they are reluctant to take positions either on the side of Pakistan or on the side of India when it comes to the question of Kashmir. They have taken a certain position for the last several decades, and they would like to maintain that. We have had this kind of an experience when in 1999, and Naseem Zara Saba would bear me out, that we did sort of make a move at the UN level, but then certainly we observed that countries, they were reluctant to do that. For instance, I am often asked this question by a lot of people in webinars as to why did our best friends, the Middle Eastern countries or the OIC countries, also did not support us on the Kashmir issue following India's illegal action of 5th August 2019. And my response to it is that in the Middle Eastern countries, I would say the major Middle Eastern countries were also in some kind of a bind. Why? Because on the one hand, there were negotiations taking place to finalize Abraham Accord when this 5th August 2019 action came. The Middle Eastern countries, they found it difficult, especially those Arab countries, to come out openly in the case of Jammu and Kashmir dispute, or for that matter, to convene a special session of the OIC to discuss this issue exclusively, because of the fear that the people on the streets in the Arab countries would demand a similar session, OIC session, on the Palestinian issue. And probably, perhaps, there was a reluctance on the part of those Middle Eastern countries because they didn't want to take that route while Abraham Accord negotiations were underway between major Arab countries and the. So I think that is something which is also perhaps would not be prudent, particularly in view of the changing global environment in which there is a China factor, there is a India factor, there are also the European factor, and there is Indo-Pacific strategy, and all. There is an Afghanistan situation, Iran situation. So because of these, there is a lot of polarization which is taking place at the international level. And in this kind of an environment, to seek a UN intervention or to seek a UN resolution would not be in the interest of Pakistan, especially at this stage. But then I entirely agree with the two other distinguished panelists that we need to be a little more proactive. I would very strongly recommend that the Prime Minister of Pakistan should undertake visits to several countries in order to highlight the kind of sufferings of the people of Kashmir. The special envoy's proposal, which was made earlier, that should also be. And then I think we should also mobilize our Pakistani diaspora in Europe, in America, and other countries to highlight this issue at the respective capitals or with the respective members of the parliaments in those countries.
Thank you, sir. Naseem, we've critiqued our internal posture, our domestic policy in Kashmir. What should international partners do? Those levers are important. What should international partners do with regard to advising New Delhi on its approach towards Kashmir? You'll have to unmute yourself. You're still on mute. Can't seem to have you, Naseem. You're still on mute. Ji.
Yeah, it's been anyway.
We seem to be losing Naseem. There is an internet issue perhaps at your end. Ji, go ahead,
I
Naseem.
can
I
hear
think that's
you.
okay now.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So no, I'm just saying that, yeah. So as far as the international players are concerned, international powers are concerned, they have been using their influence. They have been, putting pressure on India, and this pattern goes back to the 50s. It's when India experiences a certain degree of pressure internationally. It engages Pakistan. It engages Kashmir. So I think the international players aren't going to do more than what they're doing. The Brits and the US, etc., they've been asking India to engage. So India is engaged with the Kashmiris and with the Pakistanis. I mean, while nobody is suggesting Pakistan going with a resolution to the UNSC, but certainly initiating a debate and discussion in the UNSC, taking the matter up to the ICJ, and really, as Ambassador Jalil has also acknowledged himself, Pakistan has been largely quiet beyond a certain point. The last, kind of important statements we heard were on kind of geoeconomics and the importance of our relations with India, which I absolutely subscribe to. But I think that, again, just going back to what we did initially after the August 2019 situation, and it bore fruit. The public diplomacy did work in an unusual manner, in a way that it didn't before, because the story that came out in the global press and the story that Prime Minister Imran Khan was leading, and everybody else, all political parties were subscribing to that, that had its own impact. Pakistan right now, its own policy on Kashmir, I think it's not in a flux, but I think it's work in progress, and that is being reflected by the lack of clear articulation on substantive issues. By now, Pakistan should have come up in the last 10-12 hours with what Modi is proposing, what he's wanting to do with delimitations, what it means for the Kashmiri movement, I don't have a fact sheet. We don't have a fact sheet in the press from the Pakistan government. I think those kind of, and the same then being brought up in international capitals, it's very important public diplomacy, and we've seen how it impacts, and we can still raise it in the UNGA, we can raise it in different forums. Certainly no country is going to come and stand next to Pakistan and with the Kashmiris confronting India. No, it won't happen. But there are other dimensions to public diplomacy which will work. And just on the issue of whether it's the Quad, the Indo-Pacific, all of those aspects, we have a counter to that. We look at the way China's policy with India has moved in a way that is to the advantage of the Kashmiris and to the advantage of Pakistanis. Iran, Turkey, Malaysia, Pakistan, China, Russia, these are countries which obviously have a say, which are important counterweights to the Quad and other elements, other powers. The SCO, India is there, but still SCO carries weight, and most of the countries there are ones that would stand by what by and large with the Kashmiri cause. So those are things that Pakistan, I don't think, is really currently focusing on. And again, I'd repeat, primarily because I think there's some kind of rethink within Pakistan, and we need to hurry up with that rethink.
Khurram Dastagir Sahab, I'd like to refer the last question to you. There's been good critique our internal policy, our domestic posture. We've also spoken about several recommendations for decision makers here in Islamabad who will do good by listening to them. What is your view of a timeline in terms of what happens next in Kashmir after delimitation or up to the elections? What changes do you see as an India expert and Kashmir watcher?
Sadly, what I see is Pakistan lacking initiative and Modi moving forward. And we are also have essentially, this might be a strong phrase, but we have become convinced of our own impotence on the subject. That we can't do much. our voice doesn't carry because of our economic weakness, and therefore nothing is worth doing. When that is not correct. The fundamental fact, as Jalil Saab has said more than once, is the fact that the Kashmiri people in the Indian occupied Kashmir refuse to give up their dream of liberty. So we have to just build on that. We are just diplomatic facilitators in order that that flame of liberty and their desire for self-determination goes across the world. The world knows about it. In fact, that this a massive crime, human rights violations have taken place. But the world, I mean, while during our program, one has just heard that FATF has still maintained Pakistan on the grey list. So the fact that we are still on the grey list, despite doing legislation that no other country in the world has done in trying to at least make our systems amenable to FATF, FATF, because of its own political compulsions, has taken a decision that leaves Pakistan hanging, leaves Pakistan open to pressures. And as long as, I mean, Pakistan is always open to pressures from the international side because of our own economic and internal weaknesses. But I think the first thing we should do, I mean, whatever the international timeline on one side, is at least begin a dialogue in Parliament about where we need to go. And the fact is, again, as I said, I'm as an elected representative, it's a matter of some concern to me that the Chief of Army Staff speaks to media anchors, but no one comes and speaks to the elected representative of the Pakistani people. No one talks to the political parties who have taken, tens of millions of votes of the people to say, okay, this is the policy. When it is a policy that affects all of us, it affects our children's future, whether there's going to be peace in the region, and whether there is going to be ultimately the dream of a Kashmir that has had the right to determine its own future. All we hear are confusing signals, confusing statements. So, even, I mean, one thing I would propose is maybe silence from the highest Pakistani officials for the next 3 months on Kashmir, while they do their work of consultation and discussions with the elected representative in Parliament to find out what are the thoughts of the elected representative, what do the political parties propose moving forward, and to say that yes, we have our internal fissures and internal weaknesses, but keeping those in mind, this is how we are going to move forward. And the first way is, of course, always, I mean, I may have put the Foreign Office too much on the mat during our discussion, but the fact is that the government has to act before political consensus can back. Government has to discuss what they are going to act, to say, okay, this is what we are going to do, we seek your support. And when it comes to Kashmir, there's no other voice. We all want to support the government when it wants to take steps forward diplomatically on Kashmir. But when it comes to reducing the suffering of the Kashmiri people, when it comes to asserting their right to self-determination, whether we're trying to expose India's crime, so far we have been lacking.
Thank you, sir. It's quite evident that there are very strong views on Pakistan's Kashmir policy, and also recommendations that perhaps the top leadership should remain quiet as one policy intervention. I think there is always a case for truthfully telling or reflecting what our policy fissures or argumentations may be. And occasions such as the meeting yesterday has offered one such opportunity for us to debate and arrive at a process of consensus building. I think this process has been ongoing for a while now, as many of us who work in Indo-Pak relations are aware. We need to build better consensus, and through this be able to reflect better what our concerns in Kashmir or India are. I thank the participants very, very much for giving their time and expertise, and hope that they will join us on further such discussions, because this is a conversation that will go on. Khurram Dastagir Saab, Jalil Abbas Jilani Saab and Naseem Zehra, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.